All right, everyone, and the time for our next panel discussion is particular on corporate culture and long-term success. I would like now to invite the panelists and the honor moderator as following. Firstly, may I invite Dr. Christine Chow again, Director of Hermes Equity Ownership Service. Please give her a hand, please. And next, Dr. Roger Barker, Managing Director, Barker Association and Chairman, Global Corporate Governance Conference Advisory Council. And again, Ms. Prue Bennett, Managing Director, Head of Investment Stewardship, APAC of Blackrock. And next, เรียนเชิญคุณวีรศักดิ์ Kositpaisal ค่ะ Expert on Corporate Governance and Social Responsibility, the Stock Exchange of Thailand. And this panel discussion will be moderated by, again, Mr. Low, CEO of Asia Pacific Blackrock, and he is also our speaker this morning. And I will now hand over the time to Mr. Low for the panel discussion. Please.
Right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the last session. Essentially, I will have 3 questions that I will pose to the panel here, to the panelists. The first question that I will ask them is to get them to define what is corporate culture. I think this is a big challenge because if you read through the many codes of corporate governance, they don't define what is corporate culture. So I think it'd be useful to hear from the experts what do they think is corporate culture. For the first question. The second question that I'll ask them is that how does corporate culture, the way that they define, can lead to success? And the third question that I have for them is what's their wish for corporate culture? Right? And then of course I'll open up to the floor in terms of getting you to ask questions of the panelists and of course myself. So with that, maybe I can ask Kun Veerasak. To start with, what is your definition of corporate culture?
Corporate culture is to describe what we are, who we are in the organization. It can be expressed in terms of the shared values of the company, attitudes, standards that we and also behaviors in that particular organization. So the cultures in the company reflect the characters of the company.
So it's character and values.
And values.
What people believe in.
Yes, the belief that the people believe in that organization. And at the same time, it has to be the culture that makes people happy to work in that organization. And we're going to talk about later that how to link to the company success and how we deploy the organization cultures. But that's what the culture is.
And if you to include this in the Thai Code of Corporate Governance to define corporate culture, how would you define it, or formally in the code?
For the Thai culture, well, in the Thai culture, we are probably be different than the Western culture. Sometimes the organization culture set from the top, and very importantly, the leaders in that organization that set the culture, set the example, and set the characters of that organization. Sometimes it's often that we tend to forget what we are and who we are.
I think that's a very good insight as to who we are.
Who we are and what we are.
And what we are.
And what we are. in the organization, we want to work with the people that we have the belief similarly in nature. People that we feel that we are the same, we are friends. So it's very important that when the organization recruit the people, we have to try to recruit the people that fit the culture in the organization. And sometimes it's very difficult because at first it's very difficult to read how the people are. But I think to conclude, the organization culture or corporate culture is to describe how we work in that organization.
And what makes us happy.
And very importantly, and the people feel happy to stay in that organization.
So if you were to get companies to disclose this in their annual report, what makes us happy? How would a company say that? What makes us happy?
Well, for the Thai context, they will be happy to work in the company with good image.
Oh, okay.
Work in the company that they feel proud to tell their friends that I work for this company. So it's the brand that come into play in this area. So,
okay, I like that. Can you imagine if you get all listed companies to put in their annual report, this is what makes us happy?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
We should do that. Okay, thanks, Veerasak. Prue, what in your view is corporate culture?
I think corporate culture is really driven by the company's purpose, values, and principles, which should be taken.
So we got values. So sorry to interrupt you, Prue.
Sorry?
So Veerasak talk about values. So you talk about values. So we have 2 out of 4.
Yep.
Okay.
If I was a betting person, I'd say we'd get 4 out of 4 for that one, but we'll wait and see what the other responses are. And I think it's also different, based on my experience, between the type of company. So a family-controlled company may have a very different culture from just a firm that's a founder firm or a widely held firm. And when I look at family-controlled companies, and I engaged with the board of a Thai company only about a month ago and did a fair bit of research before the meeting, and the culture within this organisation was profound. This is a company that's been going for a very long time, and reading the company's approach to their people, I found an absolutely compelling story, and it's very successful. Now, having said that, the company's been criticised for some corporate governance actions, and I had spoken to other investors about it at a different time, and very, very critical, but I'm sure they didn't really understand the culture that's behind this organisation that has driven its success. So as an investor, when we're looking at governance issues, we really need to do that research into the culture behind the company and sort of, what's driving the particular structure. And looking at founder companies, and I'm going to choose Blackrock as an example. Larry Fink is a founder of Blackrock, and he drives a very strong culture within the organisation. It's a very positive culture. He meets with employees globally on a regular basis. He must be one of the most travelled people that I know. And the respect for him as a leader within our firm is phenomenal. And I feel very honoured to have worked for someone like Larry. And so I think the founder type of company again has that different type of culture. Then the third type of company is the widely held, and again, culture is a different issue there, where you have a turnover on average of the CEO of less than 5 years, and that culture is generally driven from the top, and that relationship between the board and the CEO. So it's very hard to maintain that when the CEO turnover is very high, and I think we've seen breakdowns of culture. Wells Fargo is an example where 5,000 people didn't know the difference between right and wrong, and yet we had a board that had no idea. So there was a huge cultural failure, or failure of culture. In Australia, there's currently what's called a Royal Commission. It's like a court that has very strong investigative powers. And the breakdown of culture in in the Australian financial system, where insurance companies have been charging dead people for their premiums, and the staff thought that was okay. And so, breakdowns of culture can be really concerning from an investor perspective. Yeah, but I think coming back to that, purpose, values and principles really defines culture, but it needs to be pushed throughout the firm. It's okay to talk about tone at the top, but there's also that mood in the middle. And that's where the breakdown in Wells Fargo was that mood in the middle where the board had simply no idea.
So thanks, Pooh. So you got purpose, values and principles. How would you get a company to disclose this in their communications or their annual reports? I
think purpose, all companies should have a purpose, which I think is actually different from a vision, but we could probably debate that. And I think it's around how the annual report is drafted. I've read many annual reports over the last 20-something years, and I can tell when the chairman's report and the CEO's report's been written by the same person. That's a breakdown in culture. If they can't find the time to put pen to paper to communicate to shareholders, I think that's a failure of culture. But I think it is around anecdotes from the firm, on the public stories on the website. Doesn't have to be in the annual report. We can save paper and put it on the website. I think that can be very, very powerful. A firm with a long history, as I said, I did research into a Thai company, and there was a lot on the history of the company and a lot of anecdotes, which really showed to me that the strong culture within that organisation.
So principle, purpose, and values. That's Pru's definition of culture. If I can put you on the spot, Pru, who should own culture in the organisation? The CEO or the chairman?
I think it's a combination of the two. I think that relationship between the chair and the CEO is critical to a good culture within an organisation. Where that relationship breaks down, that's when that'll have an impact throughout the organisation. So I don't think it's either one. I think it's both, and that relationship is extremely important.
That's insightful. Maybe we double back to Kun Veerasak. Who should own culture? CEO, chairman, or both?
It's the employee of the whole organization.
The employees
that owns
culture.
The culture. But the chairman set the tone. The chairman or board of director set the tone of what kind of culture or belief in that organization that they want. And CEO is the one who deploy and make sure that the whole organization behave the same.
Okay. So the chairman sets a tone, the CEO deploy or implement.
Chairman and the board of director.
Deploy. And the employees must own culture within the organization. Right. And this in combination will make everybody happy. Right. Roger, what makes you happy?
Well, that's a very personal question. But I mean, my favorite definition of corporate culture is how people behave when no one else is watching.
When nobody is watching, that is culture.
Well, yes, exactly. And I think often this becomes very important if, for example, the senior management or the board are creating unrealistic expectations or demands or goals. Then if you don't have the right culture, that can lead to some quite dysfunctional behaviour as people just try to do everything they can think of to fulfill these goals. And if you're thinking, for example, both about Wells Fargo or the Volkswagen emissions cheating scandal, I think that was probably what happened in those cases, You know, there was, from the top, there was a desire, in the case of Volkswagen, you know, to become the biggest car company in the world, to take over from Toyota. There wasn't, perhaps, but I don't know if we know, but probably it wasn't the board saying, in order to do that, cheat the emissions tests. Probably not. But it was the weight of the expectation which you know, led people to think that was the way to do it. I would just want to say something though about culture from an Asian perspective and from a national perspective. I think Asia, I think, is going through a kind of a transition from a corporate culture which was very much based on relationships to the kind of Western corporate culture which emphasizes much more transparency. And in a way, there's nothing wrong with both approaches. You know, both have huge strengths, but sometimes they can be incompatible. They can collide with each other. And I was particularly reminded of that, you know, in the case of the Olympus scandal in Japan, which was where you had a company which had lost a lot of money through failed investments over a number of years, but was effectively trying to cover that up. And that was all part of the process of saving face, managing the reputation of the company. But then you had someone coming in, a Westerner, taking over as CEO, who had the Western approach to governance, namely transparency is what counts, we've got to be open and honest, we've got to let our investors know what's actually happening in the company. And he then revealed this as a kind of a fraud. You know, but actually, I don't believe that it wasn't. There weren't such malevolent intentions necessarily behind that. It was a culture. It reflected the culture of business. So I think there, I mean, going back to the point you were making, Prue, about the need to, you know, looking at this, your Thai company with its really deep family culture and needing to take account of that. I think that's something we do need to take account of, the slightly different approaches to business culture that we have in different countries. And actually the best example of corporate culture in action, actually, I observed at first hand when I visited Shell, the oil company, and I was teaching a course there for directors. And I came into the room and I was immediately told, you can't position your chair and your table there because you're blocking the exit to the room. And then I was told at the beginning of each session, we have to have a safety moment where a member of someone here in this room stands up and gives a little 2-3 minute presentation on some aspect of safety. And this showed me this is a company where a safety mentality, a safety culture really is embedded very deeply in the attitudes of people.
That's a great story, Roger. That's a great story. So could Veerasak talk about culture being happiness and getting the chairman to show the tone at the top, getting the CEO and the board to implement, and getting the employees to own. And this is how it can be disclosed in the annual report. And Prue talk about principles and purpose and values, and that efforts shown by both the CEO and chairman in terms of giving that culture statement shows how important culture is. And maybe, Roger, if to you culture is about doing the things even when nobody's watching, how would you demonstrate culture? How would you show? How would you communicate culture if you were a CEO or chairman of a listed company?
Yes, of course it's difficult, isn't it? Because you know, what we want is substance. We don't want to see something superficially.
Correct.
I think the number one thing is for the board and the CEO and senior management to embody the culture, to live the culture, because I think everyone is very attuned to hypocrisy. You know, if they see people at the top, that there's one law for them and there's another law for everyone else, then no one will be persuaded. So you can have a wonderful ethics code, value statement, you can make wonderful pronouncements, public pronouncements, but if you have to have the leadership living the values. And I suppose for me as a board, the number one thing I would do is I would be wanting to be sure that my CEO, my leadership team, are actually embodying the values that we want this organisation to live by. And that will start, of course, when the CEO is chosen. Have you chosen the right person who's going to do that? And secondly, do they continue to live that?
So to demonstrate those values.
And if you have a situation where they are not living up to the values, that's when the tough decision comes. Because if you just say, well, we're going to ignore this, we're just going to let this go, what sort of an example does that set to the rest of the organisation? I think you can do many other things throughout the organisation with policies and so on, but it's having the leadership team that lives the values that's the most important thing.
Let me add to that. Roger just said that it's to set the example and come from the top. Let me give you an example about safety culture in some organization, because I come from that manufacturing organization, and it's dangerous work, and everything got to be right. So safety is very important. So the culture in that organization, in every meeting, the first thing that we're going to talk about is safety. This example of good safety. And CEO have to set the example. Every time he walks into the plant, he have to wear all the protective equipment, regardless. And also, we have the rule that we prevent the unsafe act. So if anyone see the unsafe act, they can ask that person to stop the work. And that's the rule. So we don't want to have any accident anytime.
That's a very good example. So now we have 3 different examples of how you define culture, and I think this is where it shows that culture can be very different to different people. But it seems like all 3 gentlemen and ladies so far is saying that in order to demonstrate culture, you got to show. The chairman got to show, the CEO got to show, the employees got to show, the leadership got to show. Tell me how you do it. Maybe Christine, can I hear from you? What's your definition of culture, and how would you show culture?
To complement that, I think my supplementary definition is that the employee's behavior is driven by a set of well understood and accepted expectations. And that's where the tone comes from. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about how you communicate. And then the corporate culture itself is about the employees and the staff behaving and in a way that they're driven by the well understood expectations. And they're clear about what the corporate purpose is. And I'll give an example of how a CEO I've come across when he was invited to speak to a graduate trainee in a program. It's a financial institution. The CEO was invited to talk to the graduate trainee in the program on corporate culture. So before he got on the stage, he took out his wallet and gave it to one of the graduates. Say, can you look after that for me because I'm about to go and speak. So the graduate, for the first time, he was holding the CEO's wallet. Of course, he kept it and make sure it was safe and everything. So the CEO gave the speech. And when he finished, he actually turned to the graduate and say, how did you feel about looking after my wallet? And the graduate says, well, I was nervous, And the CEO said, remember this feeling. This is what we are about. We are looking after our customers' money. We should always be careful and have that respect and careful feeling, like to remember that what you have just felt, and this is what we are about. So in a very short period of time, it's actually difficult to explain what corporate culture is like. And as we've discussed this morning, there are subcultures in different businesses as well, especially if it's a large company. But I guess from the graduates that were in that particular program, they will always remember that lesson as they continue in the organization.
Thanks, Christine. And how would you demonstrate that culture is important? If you were in an organization, what do you want to see?
Culture is about behavior and the expectation of behavior and eventually how people behave. So I would expect that appropriate actions is taken to not just to react to negative behavior, but also encourage positive behavior. There was one Asian company that had a food safety issue some years ago. And we engaged with them about how they're going to improve the whistleblowing culture when they see if things are going wrong. So over time, they have established this system where whistleblowers who have seen issues that might cause food safety concerns to come out and report. And it's actually built into the evaluation. So they are within the organization, they are acknowledged and rewarded for coming forward. So over time, more people speak out if they see issues that are at risk. So that is the kind of positive reward for developing the culture that is more safety aware.
Thanks, Christine. So if I can summarize the first question in terms of the panelists' response as to what is corporate culture and how do you show corporate culture is working well. So from Christine's perspective, corporate culture is about expectations. And how do you demonstrate that these expectations are being met? So very similar to the other three panelists where you show, demonstrate what are these expectations. Roger talked about his definition of culture being doing the right things even when nobody is watching you. And at the same time, he also said, how do you demonstrate, how do you show that you're doing the right things even though nobody is watching? Prue talked about principles, purpose, and values, and the importance of the working togetherness between the CEO and the chairman, working together to demonstrate, to show culture. And Kun Veerasak's culture definition, I like this the best. Not a competition, but culture is about how do you show that you're happy, happiness. And getting the chairman to set the tone, getting the CEO to implement, to deploy together with the board, and then the employees show that they own that culture. So happiness is not somebody's problem, it's your own problem. If you're not happy, do something about it. Yeah. So maybe I can get some feedback from the audience here. Anybody want to volunteer any definition of culture which you think is good to share with us, with the panelists or with fellow participants? David, Gerald, you have a contribution?
Well, it's been very interesting listening to the panel. I think when you talk about culture, we are talking about practices. We are talking about the reputation of the company from the angle of practices, behavior. So if you ask me to define what is culture, I would talk about good culture. There's good culture and bad culture in a corporation. So good culture of a company is that one or more well-established practices that attract, that the company has become to be known and attracts capital or investors. Because we are talking about companies, public companies here. So cumulatively, I mean, in aggregate, the society of investors or society of consumers will want to identify that company by the practice or practices that attracts them to the company. So if the culture is not good, they're not attracted to the company. all right? They won't invest, they won't do business. Stakeholders won't go there. So that would be my definition.
And thanks, David. And you're saying that there's both good and bad culture.
Yes.
And not all companies have good culture.
So
if a company has a bad culture, how would such a company disclose it?
No, they don't have to disclose. The employees will disclose it. The stakeholders will disclose it. A company that does not pay well or care for its employees, a company that does not pay on time, delays payment. This is a very well known fact in our markets, in various markets. Don't go to this company; they will delay payment, or they will find fault in paying, or find ways and means not to pay. So throughout my career, as a lawyer and as a president of SIS, I've come across many companies with such reputations. Good companies, bad companies.
So companies who are not able to attract the right talent by default does not have a good culture.
Well, it can't attract. It must have got to do with the way it is conducting business, as their practices of business practices, its ethical practices, or and various other related practices would deter people from going towards the company.
Thank you, David. Any other feedback from the participants as to what do you think is corporate culture or culture? Before we go to the second question for the panelists, how do we make money from culture?
Perhaps there's one little point. Corporate culture is not an optional thing.
It's not optional.
You will have a corporate culture.
Whether you like
the question is whether you choose to identify what it is, determine whether it's good or bad. But not having a corporate culture is not an option.
Yeah. So the second part of the discussion with the panelists is that how is corporate culture linked to long-term success? Or put it simply, how do we make money from culture? If we're going to spend a lot of effort in terms of disclosing and talking about happiness and purpose and values and principles and doing things even though nobody's watching and setting expectations, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. Is it worth it? Veerasak, how do we make money from culture?
To start with, setting the objectives of the organization or the corporate. That's easy.
That's easy.
That's
right.
easy.
Yeah.
And then you work through that down the line and try to determine what kind of culture you want. That's easy. But you have to look at your own organization, what culture they are doing, and how you're going to impose the culture that you want into the organization. That's difficult. So, I'm not very good in doing that, change the whole organization with the new culture. I think what we did successfully is to look at the current organization culture, did that assessment, and see what are the good culture that they already have, very strong, and serve the business objectives. Start with that. And then try to expand into other areas. Let me give you some example because I come from the manufacturing company. So safety culture is very strong, which is good. We build from the safety culture, which is very systematic, with good measurement, good communication, take no exception. We start with that, and then we start expanding into the area that we want, which is operational excellence and efficiency, using the very similar structure of how we manage the safety culture and safety system. And that proved to be very successful because it's very similar. Now, if you have that organization and you want to start something that are like risk-taking, in that organization, it's very difficult. If you want to do it, have to do it bit by bit, slowly, because it's not going to happen right away.
I think that's a very good example that you can make money from culture if culture is linked to business objectives. Choose those culture behavior that is good, linked to a business objective, and strengthen those, and focus on that, and that can lead you to long-term success. I think that's a very good time, and I think that's what I call value creation through culture. Prue, from your perspective, how do we make money from culture?
Look, I absolutely agree that culture is related to business objectives, but it's really important for the board and senior management to be able to understand what the nature of culture is within the organisation, and to be able to get the right type of data. And we've been engaging with company boards on this issue of culture since 2016 and the Wells Fargo issue, and the type of questions we ask is, well, what type of information is the board getting, so that the board has an idea of what the culture is. It's no point in having an idea about culture unless you're going to go the next step and measure what it is. Otherwise you're sitting there thinking it's what you want it to be, and it's not. Our expectations are that the company would carry out regular employee opinion surveys, which are done on an anonymous basis and fed through to the board, so they can identify where there are issues with culture. Also, independent directors should get out to the organisation. They can't just turn up to meetings, to 4 or 5 meetings a year. They need to do site visits. They need to go out. They need to talk to people below that C and C-1 level. The board has a good idea, or should have a good idea, of the tone at the top, but it's that mood in the middle where the breakdown in culture can be very costly for an organisation. I spoke to a independent director of an Australian bank, and what they have a process where the independent directors go do site visits in pairs. Other companies have organised visits for the board where there's 6 months' notice, so by the time they get to the site, everything's all clean and tidy, everyone's wearing their ties done up and desks are all tidy. That's not the type of thing I'm talking about. You will not be able to assess culture if that type of planned visit. But you've still got to have an organisation that feels free to be able to talk to independent directors when they do their visits. A really good whistleblowing policy that is independent and does either go directly to the board or a group of independent directors, or to an independent organisation that reports to the board. So there is a culture of reporting when things are going wrong. And while the question is about making money, again, I'm going back to the examples where failure of culture is hugely expensive. Look at the fines that HSBC and the other big banks have got when there's been a breakdown in culture, billions of dollars. I mean, that's huge. So if those banks spent money, and you talked about the investment in culture, even if they doubled what would be reasonable, it would still be a fraction of the fines that they got. And so I don't think spending money on culture and driving the right culture through the organisation and measuring the culture within the organisation really should be seen as an investment, as opposed to an expense and a cost. And again, going back to what I said about the value of listed companies mainly being intangible, that's about value creation, and the board needs to understand where the culture is and be able to measure that on a regular and consistent basis to make sure the right culture is maintained, improved and enhanced as they see fit.
Thanks, Prue. So to paraphrase Roger, culture is not an option. It's really not an option. And I believe Prue also echoed what Kun Veerasak said, that culture must be linked to business objectives. Otherwise, it's just talk. And I like what Prue said about culture. It's like going to the gym. You go to the gym once a week, it's not enough. You go to the gym twice a week, maybe, but it's still not enough. Culture got to go to the gym every day. Every day. Wake up at 5 in the morning, you got to work it out, you got to gym, you got to practice, you got to spend effort, you got to spend time. Like what Prue said, it's not an expense, it's an investment. Getting fined is an expense. Spending time on culture is an investment. That's not an option. Thanks, Prue. Maybe Roger, here from you, how do we make money from culture?
Yes, I think one of the starting points is just to recognise, I think has been touched on, there isn't necessarily good culture and bad culture. You know, that would be, I think, looking at it too simplistically.
It's like heaven and hell.
Yes, I mean, of course, yes. There are elements of what is good, which will always be there, hopefully, you know, such as obeying the law and behaving in an ethical way. But then there are also lots of aspects of culture, I think, which will vary depending on your business model, you know, the type of company you are. And so in the past, I've done quite a lot of work in trying to look at what sort of governance structure, for example, would favour innovation. Companies that are pursuing quite risky business activities, which need to have a very long-term success horizon. You know, we will see if they're going to succeed. And that's difficult if you're in a company, say take the oil business as a classic example. You know, you've got part of the oil business is you know, a very safety-conscious activity where precision is everything, processes are everything. But then, of course, oil companies need to be thinking about the future. You know, what is going to happen in the kind of post-carbon economy? You know, how are they going to find a new business activity, new business models to focus their activities? And so a lot of them are investing in a lot of corporate venturing activity, you know, where they are investing in small companies or business units which are trying out new business ideas. And the question there is, how do you organise that? Do you make those business units part of your overall organisation, which might not be a good idea because the corporate culture there may not favour experimentation and radical new ideas, may have a different focus. So in those circumstances, maybe you do need to kind of place barriers between these different activities where you need different types of corporate culture.
So you can paraphrase you a little bit there, Roger, is that culture is not the one-size-fits-all.
Exactly.
So within the same organizations, you cannot say, this is our culture. You're not going to make money from that. You've got to have a give and take.
It's got to be the right culture for your business model. So you need to think, what is that actually?
It can be similar, but priorities for each function can be different.
Yes. And maybe you have the wrong culture in your organization to pursue successfully a particular type of activity. You know, it's just thinking of the way in which all the banks tried to get into investment banking. They didn't really have the right culture to do that very well. So that's something you need to think about as well.
Okay, that's a very good advice. No one size fit all within even the same organization when it's come to culture. Christine, how do you make money from culture?
Well, I think other panelists have already spoken a lot about that, but I want to focus on the relationship between employees as a way to reinforce culture. Because we work together on a day-to-day basis, and with board directors as employees, we probably see them only occasionally. The tone from the top is obviously important, but on a day-to-day basis, to paraphrase going to the gym, I exercise with my colleagues. So when I exercise with my colleagues, I want to see that they are behaving in the way that I would like to see them behave, and in turn reinforce my behavior. So, for example, in Hermes within our team, as I was saying before, our behavior, it goes into part of our personal performance evaluation. And in our evaluation, we give examples of how we have helped other team members to achieve their particular objectives as part of my objective. And we believe that this is a way of encouraging collaboration and also a more open, supportive culture. Because when I help them, they also have objective to help me. And this is the more sort of tangible way of how we encourage that particular culture to kind of reinforce itself. Yeah.
So culture is not easy. It's not easy to define. So it's about happiness. It's about principles and values and purpose. It's about doing the right things even though nobody is watching. It's about setting expectations right. And how do you make money? It's about linking to the business objectives. It's about going to the gym. and going to the gym not alone, but with your fellow colleagues. It's not easy. It's about no one size fit all. And you put this all together, it's a complex mix. If you read the current codes of corporate governance, even the UK, Singapore, Thai, Malaysia, they all talk about culture as very important. And it is. But for me personally, is that I think we need to go to the next level. How do we make culture happen within organizations? The codes need to go to the next level. Maybe we hear from the floor, any feedback, any comments on how do we make money from culture? After all, we are responsible, accountable to shareholders, to stakeholders, so culture can't exist as an island by itself. And then we come back to the panel for the final question. What's a wish for Christmas? Christmas comes early. What's a wish for culture? Anybody from the floor? I know it's the end of the day and there's some tea break waiting. But I think culture is a hot topic, it's very important, and it's on everybody's lips. But yet, we can see from the first two questions, it's so difficult to define, it's so difficult to manage. No questions? So Christmas comes early. You better watch out, you better not cry. Kun Veerasak, what's your Christmas wish for culture?
My wish
Yeah.
when managing the organization, because the world is changing so fast. So sometimes our current culture is not react fast enough to the changing world. And to change the culture is very difficult. My wish is I can make change quickly and can move faster. But having said that, I would suggest that at least, even though we think we have a strong culture and people will behave well, but we need to check that as well. So the organization health check would help, because they will check the culture as well and do the assessment on the culture behavior and make sure that we still have strong culture and people still recognize that this is important to the organization and to themselves.
So Kun Veerasak's Christmas wish is to adapt and to change fast, but yet at the same time, be careful. And this way, I want to share with you this concept called Maya. Maya, M-A-Y-A. Write this down. This is a very important concept for culture. Maya stands for most advanced and yet acceptable. It is a design concept where you introduce a very, very innovative thing, but yet when somebody looks at it, they say, oh, this looks familiar, but yet it's so advanced. So Maya is a principle that really adapt well to culture change. M-A-Y-A. Look it up. It's a very famous design concept. And you all know Tiffany, the famous jewelry brand Tiffany. In the latest summer collection for Tiffany, they merged, Tiffany is famous for Breakfast at Tiffany, in the song Moon River. So that advertisement by Tiffany in the summer collection, they merged Moon River with a rap song. And it's an amazing advertisement. When I saw it, I say, this is Maya at work. You can see it's still the traditional Tiffany culture, but when they merge it with the rap song, you say, wow, this is so innovative. But yet, you can feel that it is still Tiffany. So Maya is such an important concept to adopt when you talk about cultural change. And Kun Veerasak is right. The world is changing so fast with the technology, with everything. If we don't adapt, I think we will lose out. Prue, what's your wish list for Christmas?
My wish list is that culture be an important issue for all boards and a standing item on board agendas, and that boards really understand the value of the company that their good culture or that culture could potentially represent. I think regulation can only do so much. Yes, there can be fines when there are breakdowns for culture, for poor behaviour, but you can't regulate for competence. So it really is incumbent on boards to understand the role that culture plays within the organisation and in the value of the company and as a value driver for long-term success.
Should we have a culture subcommittee.
Almost.
Oh, almost. and maybe sustainability and culture can come together.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
maybe. Thanks, Prue. Roger, Christmas wish.
Yes. Well, how about, we've been talking about ESG, environmental, social and governance. How about ESGC, environmental, social, governance, culture? So we embed that into both from an investor perspective and from a corporate perspective. And because really we need to think about culture in everything the company does. I mean, when you make a promotion, what are the cultural implications of that? If you promote from within, that may be a safer bet in terms of promoting the corporate culture than just bringing in someone else. If you're merging together two companies, what are the cultural implications of that? I've often thought that the Renault-Nissan alliance was always very smart from a cultural point of view, because they knew that if they brought together a French firm and a Japanese firm, from a cultural perspective, it was always going to be really tough to merge those two companies together. So they brought them together within the format of an alliance, which allowed their respective cultures to remain, but still cooperating.
Side question, Roger. If your wish were to change the listing rules and to incorporate culture into a listing rule, what rule would that be?
You see, I don't think the listing rules is something which is looked at by regulators, when monitored by regulators. And I think this is inherently a very difficult area for regulators to oversee. It's actually a much better area for shareholders to oversee and assess. I think that they're it's very difficult. Regulators, they don't have the right incentives. It's a tricky one. They have to treat everyone the same. They can't take into account subtle differences between companies. It's for the directors, of course, and shareholders.
Good answer. That was a trick question, actually. Yeah, you can't regulate culture. It's like you can't tell parents, no, you don't do this, I'll send you to jail. Well, kind of. Christine, what's your Christmas wish for culture?
My Christmas wish is for companies who haven't had an explicit corporate purpose to start working with the board members to explicitly disclose that with a board endorsement, because that will spark off a host of follow-up actions, including what is the expected behavior, what is the expectations, which is what we have talked about. Tone from the top, move from the middle. It all comes from starting with having an explicit and clear corporate purpose that drives culture and endorsed by the board.
What is your why? What is your why? Not what is your what is your where, but what is your why?
Why is what
why? Purpose.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I think start seeing some listed company start doing what you just said. They put in the yearbook annual report and describing how they're gonna meet the objective and what are the cultures, DNAs of the people in the organization. Yeah, I start seeing that.
Any questions from the floor as to, we have a gentleman there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chairat. I'm from ASAP Car Rental, a listed company in Stock Exchange of Thailand. The corporate cultures and long-term success lead me thinking about how could we make the corporate culture sustainable. Considering that, right, the set of the board will be changed through time. The set of employee will change through time as well. And probably a mix of shareholder will be changed. So that the whole dynamic things, right? If you have a very good corporate culture today, how could you make it sustainable when these three, let's say, party keep changing?
Good question. Is culture about people?
Well, there's some tools to measure the organization culture, the level in the organization culture, and people behavior in the organization. That can be help. That can help. to determine what level of the organization culture that we are doing is still good or start dropping.
But how do you stop it from dropping?
Start from dropping, then we have to look further, do more some analysis. And I have the example case, and we solved that problem. It's by set the role model of the good culture, behaviors, and show to the employee, this is the culture that we want. And the role models, we not only one role model, we build about 20 good role models, and we train them. And then we communicate to the employee. And communication is very important as well.
I think that's a good solution. Continuously look for role models before people change too much. You keep on pushing for role models. Maybe Prue, any advice on how do you deal with change?
Sure. I think to continually monitor the culture within the organisation. I mean, don't forget, Blackrock will still be on the register in 10 years' time because we're a passive investor. But that monitoring and that change, and if I think of the financial services companies that have had that breakdown in culture, an example is Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which has just recently received fines of over $1 billion Australian dollars. And there was a very good report issued by the regulator, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, which I'd highly recommend everybody read. It was an excellent report. And had the board been measuring the culture and had a proper whistleblowing system, the behaviours that resulted in those fines would have been picked up well before the breaches of the various acts had occurred, and the cost in terms of the penalties would have been much less. But because the board wasn't monitoring the culture and documenting what it is, and if you've got a history of that, as the board changes, at least you can look back and see what was being measured and what the outcomes were. And as the culture, there might need to be a shift in the culture depending on the business of the company. As that changes, we've got interruptions hitting organisations, then the board has that information to be able to implement the change, should it be necessary. But that constant monitoring by the board, I think, is extremely important, and to ensure that it's continually measured.
Not going to the gym one day, but going to the gym every day. David?
I have a question for Prue and possibly Christine. Prue, in investing in a company, do you consider culture as a very important factor? Have you? If so, what is that culture that you've been looking for in that company? I've heard Christine talk about purpose, but you actually plow millions of dollars in companies. Therefore, has it been your practice to first look at the culture of the company, or do you look at returns, or is culture so important that you would walk away if the culture is not good? If so, what is that culture that you're looking for?
Okay, well, from a passive perspective, the simple answer is no, because the portfolio is constructed according to the particular index. Therefore, the stewardship team has two tools, voting and engagement. And where we've seen breakdowns of corporate culture, we have voted against the re-election of directors. From a scientific active equity perspective, that's the quant investment strategy. What they are doing, they've got measures for culture where they search various social media. They've got service providers that give them feedback on social media about certain companies. So that's measuring what employees are saying on social media. And if that's hugely negative, those companies may be excluded from the portfolio. So there's a culture score that goes in from a quant perspective. That is also being incorporated on the active equity side. So the active equity investment strategy involves a conscious decision to buy, hold or sell a particular stock. And often where you've seen breakdowns in culture, that definitely impacts a portfolio's manager decision about whether that stock should go in. And if there are indications of breakdown of culture, that can have a very strong impact on whether that stock stays in the portfolio or is underweight. And I have seen many decisions made, because we sit with the active equity investors, where there have been behaviours being identified, and that has led to an underweight of the stock in that particular portfolio. And there are other, I know I'm not going to name the stock, but another stock that I know that they won't touch because of the corporate culture.
Maybe I can share a short case, which is a well-known case for Hermes investment. It's Volkswagen. So our team has been engaging with Volkswagen since at least 2004. And we've always had a question on especially board culture, but also the influence of the corporate culture by the dominating chair. So in Q1 2015, that was before Dieselgate, our investment team came to us and said that the third-party ESG indicators, because we have a quantitative dashboard, are all dropping. What is the issue? And we kind of explained our engagement history and said that there is problem with the culture and tone from the top. Quite aggressive targets, and founding family dominated. And in Q2, the chairman at the time, actually, he resigned. And some of the third-party indicator has actually re-rated the company. And but we insisted on our conviction, saying that culture takes a long time, and we do not think that this would help. So why did they invest in the company? Even if a company has bad culture, it doesn't mean that you won't invest. You just have to look at what is the risk-adjusted return, potential return of this company. And I think by September, I was when Dieselgate issue happened. And it's only then we realized that based on our cultural assessment, our investment team actually divested all of the Volkswagen shares based on the understanding that the risk is not worth the potential return. The risk is no longer justified for investment in that company. And that actually helps drive the performance of that particular team. So just an example.
Thanks, David. Any last questions, feedback from the panel? And any last questions from the floor? I know it's running late and it's a long day, but it's been an excellent discussion on culture. If not, then if I can summarize the excellent contribution by the panelists, culture is about being happy if it's linked to business objective. If you go to the gym every day with your fellow colleagues and no one size fits all when it comes to culture. And with that, please join me in thanking the panelists for their time.